Right, so we're going to move on from there to one of the few films that the director has made in English, or mostly in English, and this one's set between United States and Mexico, and that's Perdita, Durango, Scott.
Yes, also known as Dance with the Devil, in which Rosie Perez's titular character, by which I mean Perdita, not Satan, although there's some crossover in outlook, I suppose, is heading back to Mexico to scatter the remains of her dead sister. While there, she meets Javier Bardem's Romeo Dolorosa, a sort of jack-of-all criminal trades who looks a bit like a cross between Little Richard and Screaming Jay Hawkins, and whose current primary scam is setting himself up as a priest of Santeria, aided by Adolfo, who looks and sounds like Screaming Jay Hawkins because, check notes, that's who he is. Yes,
Oh, sorry, I've spoiled it for you.
Yes. Now, giving a blow-by-blow account of what happens in Perdita Durango is a bit of a fool's errand, as it's basically just a violent crime road trip. Finding out that the source material, Barry Gifford's 59 Degrees and Raining, the story of Perdita Durango, is a sort of spiritual sequel to his Wild at Heart, makes a lot of sense in retrospect, this having a similar unhinged, free-associating vibe to it. Nonetheless, I should make you aware that this is the sort of film that takes a break from a scheme involving the illegal transport of refrigerated human fetuses to make cosmetic moisturiser in order to kidnap people at random to murder in a ceremony. So, it's not doing well on the sympathetic protagonist scale, but still, not every film needs one of them, and our anti-heroes here are at least interesting enough to keep you engaged with their antics. Which is not to say that it's necessarily good, although I don't think it's bad exactly. By its nature, it lacks focus, ultimately spending a bit too long flashing back to Romeo's childhood, or dialogue between the two teen kidnappees that doesn't do much to shed light on anyone involved's worldview, or with an underserved James Gandolfini as the DEA agent on the trail of Romeo. There's certainly a very 90s indie feel to most of the film, in a way that these days we'd call Tarantino-esque, and perhaps this feels most comparable to something like Natural Born Killers, at least in the way that it seems to value shock over having any kind of point. I'll concede that at least there are some people who would make an argument that there's more to Natural Born Killers, even if I don't particularly agree with that, but I don't think there would be anyone going to bat for Perdita Durango. Still, I was entertained enough for the duration of the film, thanks to the inclusion of buckets of nihilistic violence and a Nick Cage-level performance of scenery chew annihilation from Javier Bardem. Really, my main complaint with the film, despite the title and a strong introduction, before long, Perdita is a spectator in her own story, carrying along in Romeo's current, apparently only because a film needed to happen, which is strange. Anyway, this is a film I've heard the name bandied about for many years, and I'm glad to have finally seen it, but I'll most likely never go back to it.
Perdita is mostly not in Perdita Durango. It's strange. She doesn't have a lot of agency sometimes, and the rest of the time she's just absent.
Yeah, it's strange. It's like she's set up really strong in the first few minutes, and then I just kind of forgets about her for the rest of the film. So it's very strange, given the title of the film.
Yeah, I did not like this film. I really didn't like it. However, I was way too interested in it to think it's bad exactly.
Yeah.
I was watching this, and like a good part of me, in fact, was quite convinced that this must be about something. I've come to the conclusion that no, it's not. It's just a bunch of mental stuff happening. Yeah. But I was watching it, and like, there's too much interest. There's too many interesting visuals of your boy Bardem. It's kind of good to know he's got that in him. That kind of, well, I suppose performance, but yeah, I felt, I don't know anything about the source material at all, and I've never seen Wild at Heart, and I didn't even realise that was the same author, but I've not seen that. But yeah, it just felt like it must be like an allegory or something, or there was some reference to something like what they were doing, like they represented, I don't know, I don't think it's this, it's like that it was going to be some sort of like post-colonial thing or something like that, and then it's like, no, it's just weird crap happening. Okay. And it's like, it was lesser for that, to be honest. It drags on a bit. It's not the first time I'm going to say that tonight. That'll come as a surprise to no one, I'm sure.
Yeah, he does have a bit of a third act problem.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. The biggest problem with it, and again, you don't have to have likeable protagonists, but when both of your protagonists are murdering rapists, yeah, I have a kind of hard problem getting a hook into that. You know, it's not good. I don't like these people. They're not nice people. There were two other real problems I had with it. One was I guess you might describe it as mechanical, but clearly Javier Bardem speaks good English, but I wonder if had acted in English before that, and I didn't check. I don't know if you had, Scott, but sometimes while he was speaking the English very clearly, his emphasis was weird. He was emphasizing the wrong, not even the wrong syllables, like the wrong words and phrases. And with the director not being a native English speaker, he's maybe not going to notice that either.
This was his first English-speaking role.
Yeah, there you go then. So by the time you get to Skyfall or something, obviously he's very, very well versed in it. It's just, and it didn't bother me. It was just obvious that he was kind of maybe slightly out of his element, and if the director's not a native English speaker, is not really going to notice perhaps that it was that. Although curiously, there were a couple of other weird emphases on from other actors, so I'm wondering if actually they were getting line readings from the director, but because he's not a native English speaker, he was getting them wrong.
Yeah.
Because it was a couple of Rosie Perez's lines, and I don't recall if it was Gandolfino, but it's hard to tell with the two kids because they were both pretty terrible actors.
Yeah.
But there was at least one other time I noticed it, and there was really weird emphasis, and I think, is that a line reading? In which case, that wasn't a good idea if you don't speak English natively. But that was really minor. I was like, yeah, another thing that held my interest watching this was like, why has that happened? But yes, the other thing is the tonal shifts. They're so weird.
Yeah.
Again, it's not that's not the only time I'm going to mention that tonight either, but as I say, the protagonists are murdering rapists, and then there's this strange little sidetrack that Romeo goes down at one point when he's talking about having seen Burt Lancaster films, Vera Cruz in particular, when he was on his little island, where every race lived. We didn't talk about that, the fact that Javier Bardem, the Spaniard, the European, is playing someone who's of like a mestizo, I guess, a mixed race Latin American man. They're like, didn't look like that comfortable. I'm not happy about that. That was weird, but I don't know quite what was going on there. Although, curiously, his brother, who played his cousin in this, does look, despite also being Spanish, and his brother did look more Latin American, which was weird. Curious. I don't know the man's history, so maybe there is mixed blood in there. It's because Javier Bardem is so clearly European, it felt a bit uncomfortable that he had his facial hair like he was, but and just the hair, his hair. Oh dear God, his hair. But yes, I've distracted myself. The tonal shifts. When you've got like he's murdering people, then they go on that little jaunt about watching the Burt Lancaster films, which is then called back to in pretty much the last scene, because Romeo has said like that's a way for a man to die, referencing Burt Lancaster being gunned down by Gary Cooper at the end of that film, and then somebody walks up and looks at him and goes, "Oh, he's got really nice teeth," and that totally threw me for a minute until I realised no, they're referencing him mentioning Burt Lancaster's teeth at the start of the film. Like, what is that? Where's this film coming from? What's it saying? And then I said they're kidnapping people, but then just after they're kidnapped people, they're driving along in actually maybe before, but they're driving along in the truck with Javier Bardem and Rosie Perez singing along to music, and there's like completely manic, giddy, almost like childlike look in Romeo's face as she's singing along to this song. It's so all over the place tonally. Like how many tones do you want? All of them at once, possibly. So it's interesting, and for that reason, I don't regret having watched it. I don't actually think this is a film I'd heard of before, not that I recall, Scott. But I don't think it's one I could recommend, though. It's too.
Yes.
In many ways, it's too.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting film. I'm not sad to have watched it. I probably kind of recommend it to people who are interested in films because it's interesting, and you can probably get something out of it. I probably wasn't so bothered by tonal shifts because I wasn't taking it particularly seriously to begin with at the start. It just does not seem to be the film that kind of either earns or wants a great deal of serious inspection into it. I mean, if you want something that's... if you were thinking of like maybe seeing... Are they meaning anything by bringing so much of this Santeria thing to it? It's like, well, yeah, if you were thinking of that, then maybe something that's not done by someone as Chicago as Barry Gifford is probably not the source for that kind of material. You know what I mean? So it was just a kind of crime jaunt, a pulp fiction in the old sense of the word, and in that regard, it's sort of interesting and a sort of a kind of evolutionary end point of what Tarantino could have been doing if he went completely off the rails, I suppose. Yes, I don't regret having watched it, but it's a guarded recommendation, I suppose, for people who are interested enough in films to be, say, listening to podcasts about films. So, yeah, take that for what it's worth.
I mean, I'd hesitate to compare it to Tarantino because the dialogue just doesn't live up, and Tarantino films tend to have a story. But I would perhaps consider retracting my lack of recommendation because I really did find it interesting. Again, not the same as good, not the same as entertaining, but interesting.
Sort of in a kind of car crash kind of way, kind of thing, yeah.
In many ways, yeah. Yes. Although the tonal shifts really did bother me. It's like, oh, I was supposed to be amused by the murdering rapist now, and I'm not letting go of that because I was finding that difficult. But it's yes, it's interesting, and I think the only other films I've seen like it are also going to be in this podcast episode.
Yes.
So it has that going for it.
Yes.